In my previous video, I've shown you how to change default options for shapes in Photoshop by creating new tool presets. And one of the viewers has asked me how to use the last setting, for example, the last preset as the default. In other words, it means after using a preset and you close Photoshop and reopen it, the last preset that you have selected is still selected. So I did some tests on Photoshop to see how it works. First, when I selected a new preset and then closed Photoshop and reopened Photoshop, it didn't save the last saved preset, that is the preset that I just selected. Then I reopened Photoshop and this time use the preset and save the Photoshop file. And when I reopened Photoshop, it still didn't set the last preset as a default. And then in another test, I opened a new file, used a new shape. This time I saved the file as well as I saved my project as a PNG. Then I closed the Photoshop and when I reopened it, it did work and Photoshop saved the last preset that I've selected as default for my new project. So basically, to be able to force Photoshop to remember your last preset, I had to save the project and then save it as PNG or any other format, and then it remembered. And then I did more tests, and another test that really helped to set the last selected preset as default was when I changed the location of the Photoshop project file to a new folder on my desktop, and then I saved it as a PNG as well, and then I closed the Photoshop and opened it again, and it still remembered the last default preset. And then I did another test in which I selected again a new preset and simply this time just saved the file, closed the Photoshop, reopened, and to my surprise Photoshop remembered the last preset that I've selected. So I opened Photoshop again, selected another preset. This time I didn't save the Photoshop file and simply closed it and opened Photoshop again, and to my surprise Photoshop this time remembered my last selected preset. So then I thought maybe Photoshop only remembers if you save your Photoshop file on desktop in a folder. So this time I saved Photoshop file again to the first folder where it wasn't working. And I thought maybe it's not working because the path length was too long. So I tested Photoshop again to see whether it will remember the last preset that I've selected without saving the Photoshop file. And to my surprise, it still remembered the last preset that I've selected. So final conclusions. If Photoshop doesn't remember your last preset that you have selected, simply change the file location to your desktop, save the file, then close Photoshop, and it should fix your problem. Or after saving your Photoshop file, save the file as another type such as PNG, then close Photoshop and it would still remember. Apologies for making this video a bit longer than it should be, but I thought it's important to mention the process from which I learned how to fix Photoshop when it doesn't remember the last preset that you select. If you have any ideas why this was the case or you have any questions, please let me know in the comments.